Thank you and welcome. Wow, what a great turnout for what promises to be a fantastic event. Fall Prevention Industry Crisis Summit. In a moment I'll introduce the panellists that we have compiled for you this morning to discuss what are emergency issues facing the fall prevention industry. And one of the concerns that I have as a lawyer practicing in this area is that whereas fall prevention is overrepresented in the statistics of fatal injuries in workplaces, we continue to downgrade the management and regulation of this area. And to that end, I have a number of questions that I want to pose to our panellists, and I want to introduce them in a moment. To my right, immediately to my right, is Mr. Dimitri Barlos, State Coordinator with the Stakeholder Engagement and Technical Services Construction Team of WorkCover New South Wales. It's probably the closest the WorkCover has been to me in a non-adversarial contest, so please give him some encouragement. He's got some tough questions to answer today. To his right is Carl Sachs, who many of you would know, Fall Prevention Installer, Division of the Working at Heights Association, WAHA. And just giving a plug to WAHA and its website, www.waha.org.au, and I encourage you all to go to that website and find out more about this area. I should disclose, Carl's a good friend of mine, and it's his passion in relation to fall prevention that has brought me here today to facilitate this session. To his right is Michael Biddle. Michael is chair of the Working at Heights Association, WAHA, and it's a privilege to have him here. Also on the panel is someone who you might know better as an author and an editor, Kevin Jones, who is a commentator in this area, Safety at Work blog, safetyatwork.blog.com, and he's here to give a broader perspective in relation to working at heights issues. And then for a hands-on perspective from a user, Ken Carter from Flexem Construction is to Kevin's right, and he's got some interesting information to share with us today about some of his experiences. And then finally, last but not least, Peter Ferguson, board member for International Society for Prevention. Now, you might think that calling a workshop at a safety show as a crisis summit might seem a little bit extreme. So perhaps I can do some work to justify that allegation or that claim. Members of the WAHA committee commissioned a study in relation to the state of fall prevention equipment. This is some of the results that they found. Of 3,245 anchor points inspected and surveyed, 31% of those failed the inspection. Of horizontal static lines inspected, 119 of them, 65% failed the inspection. Of vertical static lines, 14 inspected, 86% failed the inspection. Fixed ladders, not very much better, 233 inspected against the standard, 94% failed the inspection. Layout design checked for working from height compliance, and 95% failed the inspection. 86 were surveyed. With that kind of introduction, you can see the justification for why this has been termed a crisis summit. So, with that introduction, I'd like to pose the first question to our panellists. Now, I should say there'll be an opportunity for you to pose your own questions, and there'll be a roaming mic for you to do so. I encourage you to do it, if for nothing else, to save yourself the embarrassment, because I am skilled in the Socratic method. I will just point to you. I can read your name, Chris, and I will ask you a question. And I'll ask you to pose a question. So if you have not suffered that experience at my hands, you're in for a treat. So volunteer to save the person next to you. Now, the first question I wanted to pose was to Michael and Carl. How confident should Australians be that fall prevention equipment is safe to use? I'll start with you, Carl.
Well, from the survey, there's clearly an issue out there, and there are varying degrees of conformance to Australian standards of fall prevention equipment. You can identify which product complies and which doesn't, often by independent certification and by labelling and auditing by associations like SAR Global, but the issue arises often when it's actually installed. Now, why the installation issues come about, and I think, is firstly that there is a training issue. There's no mandatory training requirement at all for the installers of this equipment. There's no mandatory training requirement for them to work at heights where they're being placed at risk. And there's no mandatory training in the techniques of installation on what they're actually installing. It's entirely voluntary. So from a legal point of view, and from a compliance point of view, anyone can do it. The second thing is there's no licensing requirements. We need high-risk licenses for virtually everything except installation of this equipment or working at heights. You need a high-risk license to erect a scaffold or to drive a forklift, but if you want to go and work on the top story of a 20-story building near the edge, essentially anyone can do it. And there's this very loose term about competency, which I think the clients and the end users find hard to interpret and to sift through. The third thing is regarding the certification. There's no independent system of certification of installed systems. It falls outside the BCA. It's not the responsibility of building certifiers, and essentially it's an industry of self-certification. So you go and install the equipment and then you certify it yourself. So for starters, there's a complete conflict of interest there. The next thing is with Australian standards. I said before that there's a lot of good equipment on the market. However, Australian standards are voluntary. It's not compulsory to comply with Australian standards for fall prevention equipment. It's a good idea. It's a good defence if you get into trouble, good defence in a prosecution. But particularly with the new harmonised legislation, the reference to Australian standards has been stripped out of there. So it's absolutely not a requirement. The final thing is I think that there isn't enough policing and involvement from independent authorities, and if there were, we'd probably see more compliant and safe installation. So let's call a spade, yeah? Essentially, all you need to do to go and install this equipment is you need a credit card, a hacksaw, a cordless drill, and away you go. And this is not having a shot at the smaller installers either. I'm not suggesting for a minute it's an industry of backyarders and that's causing the problem. Because some of the bigger companies, all you do is you need lots of hacksaws and lots of drills and away you go. You buy the stuff and off you go, and the next morning you're up and going and you're a height safety specialist. So I do think it's systemic, and I don't think that Australians working on rooftops could have confidence getting on a rooftop and seeing a compliance plate that what they're about to go and hang on to is actually safe.
Michael?
Well, I guess my sentiments do echo a lot of what Carl has had to say. I mean, I guess I come from a manufacturer's background, and I know that a lot of the products that are actually in the market today have some kind of certification, some have some kind of accreditation. So to the direct question, should consumers feel safe? Well, when it comes to the products, I think there's a high degree of, there should be a high degree of comfort provided that the products are installed correctly. And I guess that's where it really comes to the point that Carl's making. There is no specific educational requirement for these types of these installations. Some manufacturers take the view that they wish to accredit their installers and will provide training and will provide a certification system to be able to demonstrate that if you want to install that system, you should pass this training. but I guess it's not a universal requirement, and therefore that's where you come to the situation where you have installations that are not necessarily in line with what the manufacturer typically desires. And part of that is also brought about by the fact that some manufacturers will supply equipment to people only who have been accredited to install it, and others will choose to make it more widely available to anyone. And even though there might be some very nice instructions, that's where you end up. So I guess the second part of it is effectively, therefore, self-regulation. Self-regulation, in our view, is therefore it exists in a lot of industries, but in areas where lives are at risk, where the very equipment that's being designed to be put into the marketplace and save people's lives, in this case, we feel that a greater level of regulation is required to police that. I guess as an attempt to contribute towards the public debate and lift the standards, if you like, the WAHA organisation is currently in the early phases of a draft of a working code of practice to demonstrate how, or if you like, list a number of standards that people should be operating by. But once again, it's toothless without, you know, that usually just gets the good guys operating according to a standard. It doesn't, there's no obligation for people who might be smaller operators or larger companies who don't really necessarily abide by that. It's not necessarily going to change the focus of that. So we'd certainly welcome the participation of regulators and their involvement in helping us to raise that standard. So that's probably it for me.